I was walking the other day, like I do my morning walks,
Yeah.
and as I'm walking, there's a big sign,
Yeah.
right? Like a sign outside of one of the apartment buildings, and but there's also weeds and plants, and it was in the dirt right next to the curb. And I'm looking, and I look up at the top, and coming out of the top of the sign, and this sign's got to be 8 or 9 feet tall.
Right.
I mean, it's up there. It's a tall sign. Think like a stop sign, like that. And the pole of the sign is like a square metal tube that has holes drilled in it. Right, you see, like that kind of like has holes in it, so it kind of has a little bit of air coming in.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like think about a stop sign, right? Like a stop sign,
like a wiffle bat.
Right. Yeah, it's got the holes drilled in it, so it's like it's about that tall, and then the metal sign, it says no parking, right? And as I'm walking, and then I forgot what I had in my ear. You know, I'm listening to something in the morning, just kind of getting myself ready for the day. And I noticed that coming out of the top of the sign is a plant, right? Is a stem out of the top of the sign. And I'm thinking, all right, is that something that was put there? You know, and somebody just kind of put something on top of it.
For sure.
Right, because it's got to be a foot above the top of the sign. Like, oh, okay, you know. And as I'm getting closer and closer, it made me, you know, I started looking, and what it was the plant, the root, the tree, whatever it is. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a tree trying to tree, right? I know tree is a verb, but the tree's just trying to tree.
Right. The tree trying to do its tree.
The tree's just trying to tree.
Yeah.
Grew up the center of the pole.
Yeah.
And was growing through the top of it.
That's wild.
Right? So it made me think, you know, a couple of different things. Number one, are we following the signs with our own lives?
Right.
Right? Are we listening to the signs and letting the signs be guidance? Right? Because here you have something that could have potentially have just been a weed, or potentially have just been a dandelion. But now, because whatever plant that was followed the sign, it's like ivy growing on a wall, right? It followed the signs and allowed the structure of the pole to help it get to new heights, right? There's no, he's like, hey, that's good.
That's pretty.
There's no way that little plant would have gotten 9 feet in the air if it hadn't used the signs. You know what I mean? It needed that. If not, it would still be close to the ground. But sometimes are we recognizing how powerful the signs can be for us? Right? Now, do we use that to get us to new heights? Right? Using the signs to get us to new heights. And if we can do that, then, you know, we start to accomplish something. So it really had me thinking. And check it out.
Wow. That's crazy.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, that's real though.
And it's real. I mean, it's growing out of the top. And I'm curious to see what's going to happen as far as, what happens with that. But I think there's a lesson there. I think the lesson is are we using the signs that we need to help get us to higher heights? Because that's a perfect example of the sign where it's saying no parking, move. Right. I also think that's a great wallpaper to put on your phone, because if you pop that up when there's a story behind it, now all of a sudden you say to yourself, no parking. No parking. Have you ever seen the screen paper that's a digital clock, and it's you know what a digital clock looks like, with like the lines, the numbers, right? And it says now. Have you seen that?
I've seen that.
Yeah, so it's like, well, what time is it? Oh, the time is now.
Right.
So I think there's something interesting there as a wallpaper on your phone where you take a look at it and be like, listen, no parking.
Yeah, no.
No parking. You can pull over, but no parking. You can take the foot off the gas, but no parking.
Yeah, don't stop.
Don't put the car in park. And I think there's a lesson there. And I think that coming out, so as I'm walking and I see this coming out the top, I'm like, all right, and start thinking through. It's like, where are we not following the signs?
Yeah.
Or when we do see the signs and we just, we don't listen and we think that we know better. So.
Great story. No, that was it. Big time. It sparked a lot. I mean, when you think about like following the signs, I see the sign, I see the tree doing its tree thing, just refusing to be halted, refusing to allow the circumstance of whoever wanted to plant that sign right there on top of its spot. It didn't know what was above ground until it got there and it realized, oh man, what's going on right here, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I have to persist anyways. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what's going on here, I'm going to persist. Just like we build homes on the ground, next thing you know, the vines are they're going to persist. It doesn't matter what's going on regardless. There's a persistence in the plant that says, hey, I'll just grow around, y'all grow around, but you're not going to stop this growth no matter what happens. And so I think a big lesson could be there is just persistence, right? Regardless of the circumstance. When I hear follow the sign, I'm thinking, well, what are signs in our lives? And if we're thinking about heading a certain direction, right, how do we align ourselves to have the right understanding to know whether this is a sign that's saying the right way or whether it's a sign that's saying the wrong way? Because we still have that power of choice. Mm-hmm. It's like I could choose either way to go. So I'm thinking it's circumstantial. Mm-hmm. So if we can just look at some of the circumstances in our lives and kind of leverage those as the cards that were dealt.
Right.
Right. So everybody has their own deck of cards. We always say that, like, play the hand the best you can. But what is a hand? A hand is probably your life circumstances. Those are probably the cards that are to be played. Mm-hmm. And so everybody's is going to be different. Some people, you might have a different type of challenge on top of you that you don't even know. So regardless, before you even got started on your race, you have some things that you're going to have to figure out how to overcome. But the beauty in the story you just told is that sign actually propelled that plant to a growth and an area of growth that it would not have been able to achieve without the challenge of trying to maneuver around getting through the sign.
Right.
And so some of the circumstances may present themselves as hindrances initially. Mm-hmm. But if we take the perspective, I'm going to persist regardless, that sign and the challenge of overcoming and persisting through anyways, following that calling, regardless of it's harder for you over here than it is for the next person, or I don't feel like I'm qualified for that. You know, they're doing this. Am I like that? It's like, well, you might be way better than you think because of the circumstance that you think is counting you out. Mm-hmm. So if you just look at it from the perspective of just follow the signs, that's not a sign to stop. That's a sign to persist through. And by persisting through and trusting and having faith that you're doing the right thing, next thing you know, that circumstance, that card that you felt was so bad actually wound up being the thing that makes you great amongst everybody else.
Yeah.
No, that's a hell of a story.
Yeah.
Hell of a story.
And it's interesting. It was just the other morning as I was walking by and I saw it. And I have a little video also of walking up to it and just kind of going like this, you know, and that to me is also a sign. And then how do you read the signs? Mm-hmm. Right? If you're colorblind, then all you see is, you know, a stoplight, but you don't know if it's red or green or yellow, right? Because you're colorblind. Right. So are you taking the time to understand the signs? And that comes from discernment, right? So I think discernment of signs, right? So how do you get better at discerning signs? So when there is a sign, are you saying to yourself, this is a positive sign? This is what God wants me to do? Is it a sign from the opposing forces that want you to do other things, right? And I think sign discernment is equally as important of even recognizing the signs. Now, there's a lot of people just driving through life and there's a sign here and a sign there and they're oblivious to the signs, right? Mm-hmm. Now, so you have people that are oblivious to the signs, and then I think you have people that are overreactive to the signs, right? Where everything to them is a sign, right? You know that person that's like, oh, well, you know, this happened and I looked at my watch and it was 4:12. So that's a sign that 4 + 1 is 5, 5 + 2 is 7, 7's a lucky number. That's a sign to do it. And you're like, what are you talking about?
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. If you wanted to do it, do it.
Yeah, that's
but
real.
Don't just look at something and say it's a sign to do it. Right. So we all know that person. And so you have people that are missing the signs. You have people that are ignoring the signs. You got people that are over interpreting the signs or having limited discernment and thinking everything is a sign. right? It was like, well, it's this time, it's 82 degrees out, and that's a sign that I should be doing this. Like, it's really not. Right. Like it's not. It's just 82 degrees.
Facts.
Right. 8+2 is 10, and today's the 10th, so that means it's like no. Stop.
Numerology is a big thing.
Right. So part of it is being able to decipher the signs, and I think deciphering comes with discernment.
Yep.
Right. By deciphering with discernment, you can take a look at the signs and you can make better decisions. Right. So it's all discernment, right? Being able to decide what decisions you need to make around the signs. If you can discern them and understand what are the signs that you need to get in. And I believe that comes down to what spiritual people will call meditation, what religious people will call prayer, right? About getting quiet and being able to hear more clearly. Because I think if we do see signs, I think if we get quiet, that allows us to get into our discernment patterns. And if we can get into that quiet state of discernment, that is where we can identify the signs and be able to say, is this a sign of this or a sign of that? And what I've found is that the quieter I get, then the more I can hear the guidance, right? And that's what spiritual people will call the universe. That's what religious people call God, right? So it's about how do we get that voice to be able to guide us, right? The universe is guiding me, right? I don't know why. The universe is guiding, where God is guiding me. This is what God has for me. Fantastic. It's the same concept, but the question is, how do you turn to that radio station, right? If you have a radio and you're not going to the right station, you're listening to the wrong music. So now how do we get to that frequency of being able to hear the right music? Now, it doesn't mean we're going to always like what song is on at that given moment, but we have to have faith in the fact that this is how we can get to the message that we need to hear, right? I mean, I can imagine, let's just think metaphorically in a time of war, right, where you have ham radios and being able to have your messages intercepted by the enemy.
100%.
Having enemy transmissions going across the wires, right? Yeah. But how do you know what frequency is your team, right? Your brothers,
right?
Your leader, your general. Right. If all of a sudden you have radio that thousands of people and some wanting to do harm to you,
big time.
But how do you figure out, okay, how, what am I setting my radio to so I can hear it? And again, I think that's from the meditation perspective, is that, spiritual people call that meditation. Religious people call it prayer, of being able to get quiet and saying, okay, based on the situation that I'm in, and starting off with, as hokey as it sounds, gratitude.
Oh yeah,
right. Yeah. Being like, hey, by the way, thank you.
It starts there.
Now, how do I take the signs that are in front of me to be able to decipher what's the best decision of where to go?
Yeah.
Right. Because if it's a yield sign, metaphorically speaking,
right.
But what does a yield sign mean? Yield to oncoming traffic. Yield to, are you going into a yield sign? Do you have to yield to the people coming? And what can end up happening is that sometimes that means you stepping on the gas.
Right.
Because if you're about to go into a certain space and there's somebody coming, but they're 50 feet out, you can't stop where you are, stopping your momentum and waiting for that person 50 to 100 feet out to go past, for you then to pick speed back up. Your yield might be stepping on the gas, because you're realizing that as you're coming to that intersection, you have momentum built up. So what you need to do in that situation is actually accelerate through the curve.
Right.
And that other person, you won't be getting in their way, but the best way to get the flow of traffic going of where you need to go, because if you're just yielding to everyone all the time, you're never going to get to where you need to go. Right. If you're driving down the highway and, you want to stop every block because it looks like that person might need something. Mm-hmm. Well, hold on, that person's carrying packages to their car, so let me pull over and help them with the packages. And then, the next block over, this guy's got a flat tire and he's doing it, but let me see if I can help him.
Right.
You never get to where you need to go.
No.
You never get there. So again, that goes back to the metaphor of identifying the signs, deciphering the signs, using discernment on the signs to make a decision. If you can do that, then the probability can be in your favor. Is it always going to work? No. Are you going to get into car accidents? Yes. Is someone going to rear end you? Yes. Are you going to get flat tires on the road? Yes. But if you can identify what that yield sign means in that situation, then you can either hit the gas, slow down, come to a stop. But I think the biggest lesson there is no parking. No parking. Takes us back to the sign with the tree coming out of it. No parking. Keep the car and drive.
Mm-hmm. Just keep going. And just the mental image of thinking about no parking, right? Mm-hmm. No stopping, right? Not here, right? And then seeing the plant just persist up through that sign. It's just kind of like, it reinforces the message of like, don't stop, right? Regardless of what's in your way, don't stop. Mm-hmm. No parking. Don't park, right? Don't stop in life. Continue to persist forward. And I think that foundationally behind the story, what you said, everything was, that was some major points. It's so critical to figure out the discernment piece because there are so many things that, depending on how spiritual you are, you have so many different references on how to analyze things. And I think you were saying that you have some people who are missing the signs, some people who are ignoring the signs, and some people who I think are overanalyzing the signs. Right? We have. We try to figure out, well, how do I know what's really for me? Mm-hmm. How do I know? Mm-hmm. And I think that if we can just put our focus on no parking, no stopping, right? So if something in you feels right, it feels good, and you're like, this is where I want to go, this is where I'm going. But now, what are these signs of life that it's showing me? I think we have distractions and we have destiny. Is this happening because it's a part of my destiny? It's a part of where I'm going. Is this relationship ending? Is this career moving on? And is this thing happening, right? Did this change of pace happen as a part of my destiny to help? Am I supposed to go this way? Is that the next stage in the maze that's supposed to get me to the right place? Or is this just a distraction? And we're all in the same boat of being like, man, I don't really know. And so one of the tools that we leverage, like yourself, like you said, is being quiet, right? Getting to that space of peace. And when I think about getting into a space of peace and why there's so many distractions, outside of the mentality of like our only assignment, once we have been given the vision of where we're going, now our only assignment is to continue to persist, keep taking the steps, no matter the distractions, no matter the whatever, just keep going forward. But then I think that we have work to do in order to trust the vision which we see, in order to continue to have faith in the vision that we see. And I think we need clarity. I think that sometimes distractions can act as like debris that's in the way. Like if you've been to the eye doctor, we all been to the eye doctor, and they sit there and you got all the letters and you try to read the bottom one, right? If your vision is not clear, that bottom line may look like a whole bunch of anything, STVQSIJ, right? But then they switch it up and give you more of a clear view, and it's like, oh shoot, okay, no, that's B, X, Y, T, right? And then all of a sudden it presents a whole different picture, but that was the right picture. But the reason why we couldn't see it is because the vision wasn't clear. Yep. So then how do we clear out our vision? And I think it comes back to making healthy choices on a daily basis. And that's why the groundwork, I think, is the first work, right? Tending the soil of ourselves, of our personalities, of the way we were raised. That's why a lot of times until people like get help, therapy, start doing that groundwork, working on their spirit, figuring out themselves, learning themselves, right? Washing any of those distractions, washing the debris off of how they feel about themselves. Until they do that groundwork, they really don't progressively get towards where they want to go, towards fulfillment, right? Because there's a lot of things that come up through upbringing. We talk about that all the time that are on us. And so I think initially we have to clear the page. It brings me to that game. It was a board game, Ouija board or something like that, right? And this is like this supernatural thing. Spirit comes in and moves this Ouija board. And I think that if we're looking at, our lives like just a blank sheet of paper or a board, and we're asking, the spirit to guide us, God to guide us, the universe to guide us, it's almost like looking at a Ouija board because we're asking for questions. But how do we present God, the universe, whatever it is that you believe in, with the blank page? And I think that's where that tool of meditation comes in. I think that's where that tool of gratitude comes in, because we all know that we cannot level set back up to neutrality, right? To have that clear vision, unless we get into a state of gratitude. Then we can calm the mind from any of those negative emotions that may be presenting themselves as distractions. Because when you make a decision as being emotional, it's generally not going to lead you in the right direction. And that's how we can maybe potentially be following a lot of distractions via emotional decisions versus a decision that's more directly rooted in our calling. That doesn't have nothing to do with emotion. We know what we're supposed to do, right? And a lot of times I ask myself, when I'm making a decision, how am I feeling right now? Or when I've made a mistake, that in a clear mind, I'm like, why would I make that choice? I now look back and be like, how was I feeling? What state of mind was I in? What was going on? And so now I try not to make critical decisions, and I try not to make critical judgments in an emotional state. It doesn't matter how I'm feeling. Like if I'm tired, I try not to make critical decisions when I'm tired. I say, let me just wait till tomorrow and get some rest, because I understand that if my mood and my energies are off, if something is impeding that, now I might be misleading a distraction for a part of the destiny. Because I'm in an emotional state that makes me view something in a different light, right? Versus more logically, more around reason, right? More around foundational, like, no, this is what it is regardless of how I feel. This is one step headed in the right direction. Anyway, so we can leverage clarity as maybe a first step towards identifying how to get proper discernment. It's like clear out the noise, right? Figure out how to present, what you're asking for.
No, you're absolutely right. Getting quiet, right? I mean, we talked about that before, where it's like, how do we get quiet to be able to decipher what is a distraction versus part of your destiny?
For sure.
Right? I mean, we seem to be putting a lot of D words out there, like how do we use discernment? How do we make those decisions, right? And how do we, it seems to be a lot that goes around that, but, how do we get quiet so we can determine whether or not it's destiny or a distraction, right? And there's going to be a lot of those, and there's going to be a lot of distractions. There's going to be a lot of temptation. I think temptation is a word that goes along with distraction, right? So, I think that you can be a distraction, and at the same time, you can be tempted, right? Temptation is along the same lines. And it could be something as small as, red bubbles popping up on your phone, right? You're tempted to keep scrolling, right? For that next hit, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why they have the scrolling aspect of a lot of the social media platforms, right? There's a certain amount of anticipation, of seeking, of the thrill, of, temptation, and of the distraction of maybe getting something that will be interesting, right? Maybe seeing something that you enjoy, right? And that's, of course, why the social media companies, they do their best to understand what you like and give you more of what you like, right? It's a genius business model, right?
For sure. Yeah.
It's if anyone has a dog and they say to themselves, wow, it turns out my dog likes cheese. Like, no shit. The dog likes cheese? Who'd have thought? Right? But at the same time, they figured out what kind of cheese they like. And now, from a behavioral perspective, they can use that as a reward system, right? And people are no different than dogs, right? I mean, when it comes down to certain behaviors, when it comes down to certain patterns in the way they can behave in pleasure seeking receptors, right? For sure. Now, even dogs know what their purpose is, and that's why dogs can be highly trained, and there's a lot of dogs that understand what their purpose and what they do. At the same time, they can be distracted very easily unless they've been trained correctly.
Big time.
And I think that's the responsibility of the family unit and the community unit to be able to help train us humans, right? And it might be an uncomfortable thought for people to hear, but people need training, period, end of story, right? And you wouldn't have a soldier having not gone through training. You wouldn't have someone in law enforcement. You wouldn't have a teacher. You wouldn't have a nurse. You wouldn't have a doctor that went through a certain amount of training. So who's to say that there isn't training that's necessary just to be an adult? right? Just to be a productive part of society.
Big time. I mean, one thing we can look at is at different stages of life, you have different levels of temptation. Mm-hmm. You know, that's for sure. And I like the fact that you brought temptations into the conversation because, you know, some things that are tempting could be presenting themselves as distractions, but that's something else that we have to learn how to control. You know, you have to learn how to wield a sword. You have to learn how to use a weapon. And like your analogy going back to like the armed services.
Oh, training. Yeah, that's
training. About training. You go back to training, yeah. You know what I mean? They have to learn how to use the weapons appropriately. And, you know, there's another powerful message in that story that you told, because if you have a weapon and you don't know how to use it appropriately, the weapon is still the weapon, right? It has a purpose. The weapon is fulfilling its duty as being a source of whatever power, a tool for you. Now, depending on how you use it, depending on if you use it for good, bad, whatever you're doing with that weapon determines what it is, right? Determines the outcome, determines whether it's a negative outcome, positive outcome, whatever it is. So if you're not trained appropriately to how to use that weapon and you're trying to go out here and leverage it, right? And you're misfiring, you're not hitting the target. You know what I mean? And you're like, oh man, this weapon's stupid. Yeah, give me a different gun. Let me try Let me try a different gun. I can't hit the thing, right? You're like, oh, that's stupid, and this one's stupid. Let me pick this up. Oh, that one's stupid. Let me pick this one up. Oh, man, these guns, y'all, where are we doing the shooting at? You know, what is this shooting range? All these weapons suck. You know what I mean? But then you go back and somebody else say, hey man, calm down. Let me show you how to use it. You know what I mean? Grip a little tighter, right? Tuck that shoulder back a little bit. You know what I mean? Pow, pow. He's hitting directly on the target because he's trained a little bit more. So I think the powerful message in there is if we look at that weapon as a skill, right? Sure. That's a skill set, right? That's an interest. You know what I mean? It all matters on how we are trained on how to use that skill. And I think a lot of times we feel like we have these skills to use, right? Which might be tools. If we use them in our lives the right way, they can be beneficial tools. You know what I mean? Just like a weapon on the battlefield. That is a critical tool. But if you don't know how to use it, you're not going to be hitting your target. You're going to be vulnerable, okay? And so a lot of times I think we have these underdeveloped skills that's been placed on us. Because to your point of moving up from childhood to being a teenager to being a man, it's like what a part of that process makes you different from being a boy, teenager, or a man? What a part of the knowledge that you have, what a part of, you know, the training that you've received, what makes you be a boy, a teenager, or a man? And I think that's what the point you were saying. You were like, we need more training, right? They don't really train us for life. We're trained to be an employee, to make a wage, right? We're not trained for life and how to understand our mind and how to understand how we operate. And so then we have a feeling that like, hey, I want to do this, but I don't know how to do it. Then we have to overcome so many alternative trainings that have trained us over here, right? So you got those natural skills and abilities. And because they're underdeveloped does not mean that you're not qualified for them. And I think that we then say, well, I'm good at this though. It's like, well, yeah, because you're forced to be trained to do that. You're forced to be trained to do math. So yeah, you can do algebra pretty well. You know what I'm saying? But in your spirit, do you care about that? Right. But you're trained. And I think a lot of times we're like, hey, but I'm pretty good over here. But it's like, no. You know in your spirit, when you go quiet and you ask for what it is I'm supposed to be doing, there's a knowing, innate knowing down deep on the skills and abilities that we have, what we feel qualified to do, right? The lack of training makes us then feel like, well, it can't be for me. Maybe I'm fooling myself. Maybe this is, you know, misjudgment. Maybe I'm misinterpreting this sign, right? Because we're doing a comparison, in my opinion. I think we're comparing things that we're good at, and we're like, well, if this what I feel in my gut was really for me, I should be better. I should be just as good as these other things, or better, right? But these other things don't fulfill me, so I'm in this like conundrum of trying to identify what I'm supposed to do with my life. This is what I feel I should be doing, but this is what I'm good at doing. Which one's the sign? Which one's a distraction and which one's destiny? And I think we all know that this is always destiny, but to your point, we have to do a better job of getting back to the training and understand that this side was out of our control. Somebody said, go learn this. And so that's why we're good